welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by an author who visited us last year to talk about a really delightful, wintry, Christmassy book. And today she's back to talk about another really nourishing, fulfilling, hopeful book that I am so excited to discuss. So welcome back. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure, I'm RaeAnne Thayne, and I write small town women's fiction stories about real people struggling with real problems, and that's sort of my thing is trying to write about people that are really struggling. This book is called The Lost Book of First Loves, and after her famous literary father, died unexpectedly, Allison Wells uncovers a truth through a DNA test that revealed a half sister she never knew about. And she's determined to meet her sister, who turns out to be a high-powered tech executive, and so that they can untangle the past and figure out this connection between them. So she takes a job as the intern to this sister, who's a high-powered tech executive. But then suddenly June suffers a cardiac arrest from a congenital condition she knew nothing about. Allie saves her life and persuades her half-sister to recover at their father's writing cabin. And so in the process, it's set in Wyoming, and in the process of throughout the story, they're able to uncover secrets, look for a lost manuscript. Obviously, that's the title, and discover the meaning of sisterhood. And of course, there's romance, because I can't write a book without romance. There's a couple of them in this book.
I do love that there are a couple of romances and that it blends so beautifully with the attention given to women's relationships, whether it's through friendship or sisterhood, all those things. So last time you were here to discuss the December market, and now we're here to discuss, as you said, the Lost Book of First Loves. I'm curious about whether this book presented any new challenges for you, or if there were um, let me rephrase that question if you don't mind. So what was pivoting from your last book to this one like, and what were the new challenges you feel like you faced in telling this story?
The biggest pivot in this story compared to the December market is my Christmas books tend to be focused on one relationship, and it's sort of a linear story about their relationship, although I do bring in other factors and histories and things like that involved with people. But this is one of my summer books, tend to be about more than just that particular romance. It's also about the sisters' relationship, about the secrets from the past that they have to team up together to uncover. And so there's a little bit, I wouldn't say more to it, because I do love writing the Christmas books, and there's all those Christmas components that make it so much fun. But this one has a little bit more to it in the fact that I do multiple points of view. I have, Allie's point of view. I have Juniper, that's her sister's point of view. I have one of the male heroes' points of view in this one as well. And so, it's more fun. What I really enjoyed about writing this book was it really allowed me to explore my love of books myself. The father of both of these women was a literary icon who gained fame very early in his writing process, and so it was kind of his struggles with self-doubt, and they discover all this as they're reading his journals about all the different things that he went through as he was writing these books. And I think that there's sort of universal experiences that many writers struggle with, is we're putting all of our thoughts and our feelings out there for the world to see, and makes you very vulnerable, and you put yourself really in positions where you feel like, well, what are people going to think when they read this? And I was able to write some of those things as I wrote the journal entries of this father of these two women. It was really interesting to me to sort of dig deep into maybe some of my own insecurities and my own, writing hangups and things like that, and bring those out in their father's journal writings.
That's so interesting. And that's something that, I think about a lot when I think about sort of the writing life is that, part of your job is to spend a lot of time alone writing your book, working on your manuscript and rewriting and all these things. And then the other part is intensely public and vulnerable, where you are then presenting that work to the world and, promoting it and marketing it and just in a terms, in addition to putting out your material there, which, as you say, is very vulnerable.
It
Yeah.
is very much a dichotomy. And I would say that as the world has changed, when I first sold my first book 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And so from the time that I first published to now, it's a totally different world in terms of authors being out there and connecting with our readers, which I love that part, but it was not a part of my early journey as a writer. It was, you wrote the books, you turned them into your publisher, the books were out there, but unless you were doing a lot of signings and things like that, you didn't really hear a lot from readers, except for occasionally you get a fan letter through your publisher. And so it's a very different experience now. I love it. I would say I wouldn't change anything now, but there are two sides of yourself. You sort of have to be out there. Like you said, we're all, I think all writers at heart are a little bit introverted, or we wouldn't be happy being home, writing our books in our own little offices, with no one around but our imaginary friends to talk to. And then yet we have to go out there and connect with our readers, which is wonderful.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, this might be a reach, but I think that dovetails really nicely with the difference between your winter books and your summer books. Because, like, winter is sort of about when we go inside and we get internal, and they're like smaller, sort of more intimate stories. And the summer, we see the world again, and we're out there meeting people and we are connecting and all these things. It's a very nice, like, seasonal rhythm to the books.
That's a very good way of looking at it. I haven't considered that, but you're exactly right. I would say my Christmas books are a little more cozy. It's a little more, settle in by the fire and have a wonderful experience that is going to be emotional along the way, but is also going to, make you feel all the Christmas feels, hopefully. And then the summer books are digging deeper into some of these things that women face around the world in many, many instances, and things that we're all sort of struggling with, or certain people are struggling with at certain times in their life. And so you're right, it's very much more out there than the Christmas books are.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Allison Wells and Juniper Connolly, or June, as she would insist if she heard that just now. I'd love to talk about shaping them as individuals, but also their dynamic, because it's so complex, and it's occasionally messy, as the very complicated situation that they find themselves would entail. So could you talk about bringing them to life?
Sure. So this was based on the fact that I actually have a cousin who has this condition, the heart condition that June has. And so that was sort of what sort of informed her in my mind as I was creating her. I wanted somebody who was very athletic and very, she was a high school or even a college athlete. She ran track, and she has a job at a tech company where it's all about, being healthy and being aware of your body and things like that. And then suddenly she suffers this heart condition that she didn't know, that she had all her life, and nearly dies. Obviously she did die, and Allie did CPR and brought her back. And so that's sort of where she's coming from. She's been alone for most of her life. Her mother died when she was a teenager. And so as an adult, she's been alone, and her mother was all she knew. She never knew her father. She thought her father was her mother's husband, who was in the military and died in a military incident. And so for all her life, what she thought she knew about herself is wrong. This healthy person, this woman who had this mother who died that she loved, and now she's learning things about her mother. She's learning things about herself. She's finding out that the man she thought was her father was not her father, and yet her mother's favorite author was her father. So all these things it brings all these different pieces of herself together, and it's a real shock for her. And then, to find out that she has a sister as an adult, it was a big shock for her as well. And so from Allie's perspective, she was the adored daughter of her father, her very famous literary icon father, and they did everything together, and they were very, very close. And yet she could not save her father when he had a heart attack in front of her. And so that sort of spurred her into learning more about, CPR and things like that. So that helped her later to save her sister, where she couldn't save her father. And then she's having to come to terms with the fact that her father had this life she didn't know about. Did he know that he had a daughter? Did he know, what was his relationship with June's mother, and all these different things. So it's very complicated. It is, like you said, it's very messy for them. But I had so much fun writing these characters and exploring sort of sisterhood. And to be a little bit personal here, my husband was adopted and found out that he had 3 brothers that he did not know about as a few years ago through a DNA test. So, and they have a very close relationship now, but obviously it's a little bit messy to think about all the different situations there. And so that sort of was one of the things that inspired me as I was writing the stories, is that because we've lived it for the last, let's see, it was 2018 when he found his brothers. And now they have, like I said, they have great relationships. They talk on the phone all the time. It's a wonderful thing to see. So Been
That
fun.
that is fascinating. And it really does. I thought a lot about like how much of our identities is wrapped up like in the stories that we tell ourselves and those that our parents tell us and our families. And so both these women are sort of like experiencing a drastic rewriting of their stories in real time. And it's really fascinating to see them navigate that and how that like impacts their other relationships with the other characters who appear with the budding romances. So if we could talk a little bit about Beck and Xander, they're both really great characters, and I love how like having the two romances lets you do friends to lovers and kind of enemies to lovers at the same time. That's really great.
That was so much fun for me as well because those are my some of my favorite tropes, and I have a hard time choosing. Am I going to do friends to lovers or enemies to lovers? In this particular book, I was able to do both. So the enemies to lovers story is June and Beck. He's the neighbor, and he was dear friends with Allie's father, the famous literary icon Carson Wells, which I don't think I've mentioned his name before, but he was dear friends with him, and so he had a connection to him. June has a past with him that he doesn't know that they had a past. She had a friend. He was a high-powered prosecutor, and she had a friend who had was involved in a sort of a Me Too situation, and they didn't prosecute, and so she's angry at him for that as when they first meet. They resolve that fairly quickly, and then it's more of a situation of how does she, she's had all these changes in her life. Can she open this broken heart that she has to somebody else, where she's still dealing with everything else in her life? And to me, he was a great character. He had his own past and history, but he sort of dealt with that. So he's sort of more in a position of just being a supportive guy at this point in their lives. The other story, which is Xander and Allie, they were best friends through elementary school, junior high, high school. He always had a thing for her. She doesn't find that out until the book. Everybody else in town knew, but she did not know. And so she has begun lately. He's a very famous sort of influencer. He travels around the world, is a travel videographer, and films himself, visiting all these exotic places. And so he's lived this big life where she's been in law school. Her life has sort of been much smaller, as we were talking about big and small. Her life has been much smaller. And so then as they've kind of come together for the summer. She's there getting ready to take the bar exam, and he's there helping his great aunt who raised him, who had some health issues, and they've been able to reconnect. And she suddenly starts realizing, I feel much differently about him than I thought I did, and I don't want to ruin what we had because he's my dearest friend. How do I reconcile the fact that suddenly I have these feelings for him? And so it was really fun for me, and I loved their relationship. It was much lighter and flirtier than I think some of the stories, the romances that I write. Just the fact that they're younger, they're in their mid-20s. So I was able to. They don't have all the baggage maybe that some of us who are a little bit older have in our lives, and so it was really fun for me to sort of show that, and then he was able to tell her, yeah, I've always felt this way for you, and you just didn't see it, and I didn't want to ruin our friendship either by letting you know. And so it was really fun. That part was fun for me to write.
I really love their dynamic. And I think, friends to lovers is my favorite trope in romance. I think because like to me, it's where the stakes are the highest. Because as you say, like there is a relationship that's already there that you are potentially putting at risk, and that like makes the decision so much scarier. Yeah, they're just like, I guess my question shifting from that is like, because I think you juggle the perspectives very well and your changes of point of view between the chapters. And I'm curious about like when you are in the planning phase, because I think I remember from last time that you are a planner, not a pantser. How do you, as it were, like choreograph the perspective changes? Like, how do you know it's time to shift to a new character? Is it because you need to reveal something or hide something, that a character doesn't know or something like that? Like, how does that shape your drafting process? I hope that was a question
No,
that.
it totally makes sense. And it is somewhat organic in that I can kind of sense at this point, after having written so many books, I kind of sense, okay, I need to get some secrets out there to the reader, but not to the other characters. So I need to be in this person's point of view. What I do when I'm plotting, I plot a book pretty extensively, especially one like this that has multiple plot lines. So basically, I plotted three different storylines in this book. I plotted the storyline between June and Beck, and the storyline between Allie and Xander, and then the story between June and Allie, because theirs is a big important part of the story. So when I was plotting it, I came up with the different plot points for each one of those storylines, and then I throw all the scenes out on the page and look at them together. And one trick I've learned from Susan Mallory, whom I've plotted with before, who's an amazing author, is that, I write on index cards. She actually physically does it on index cards. I have an app on my phone. So I'll put every scene on an index card in a different color so like in the different points of view that I want to portray. And then I look at it and I think, okay, well, I've done 3 yellow, so lots of scenes from Allie's point of view. I need to get something from June's in there. And so the colors really do help me to sort of see how am I going to weave this together. And then I just sort of figure out what's the best order for everything to come together to get all those plot points in the right order so that, I'm not focusing too much on one story. I'm bringing in the rest of the points of view that I need to bring in. And it doesn't always work as smoothly as I'd like, but I really try to make it cohesive in the end. It's usually in the editing process that I say, oh, I need to do this a little bit differently, and I might move a scene around here or there, but so much of my writing is instinct in terms of I don't really analyze what I do and how I do it. I just know, okay, I need to hit these particular points, 3 or 4 certain plot points to move the story forward for these particular people, and how am I going to do that? And so then I just kind of sit down and plot out, and I do like doing the scene by scene, but it doesn't always end up that way. I often will change something halfway through and then have to go back and rework how I'm going to carry that story out to the end.
Do you think that instinctualness is sort of related to just your, ridiculously impressive productivity? Because if you are finishing books that often, like I feel like at some point, like you are internalizing that process, or even that doubt that artist experiences. Like, is it just easier to handle over time?
It is some of what is experience. Some of it is as a reader, I know what carries me through a story and keeps me reading. I know about the turning points, and I know about the secrets and the reveals and things like that really keep you wanting to turn the page. And so I've sort of absorbed all that as a lifelong voracious reader. And then again, it is somewhat the experience. I will say this sort of story, I have not a story that has multiple plot lines and multiple points of view, that's only been probably about the last 6 or 7 years that I've been writing those sorts of books, where before that I wouldn't say linear, but they were mostly focused on the romance, and then the character's growth along the way with the people in their lives, but not in this particular case where I've got multiple people involved and they're all dealing with each other, but also dealing with their own issues. And so this is a little bit more complicated. And that's why I do feel like plotting is important in this kind of story, especially because I don't want to leave plot holes that people will be like, why didn't that happen the way that it should have happened?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes pacing even more important because you're keeping those three plates spinning at all times, and managing that three different sets of pacing is really challenging, I imagine. Yeah.
It is, but it also makes it fun because it's something different as a writer. You're in somebody else's head every day, and so I typically write a scene or two a day, and so I know that I'm going to be dealing with somebody else that day. I'm back today. I'm Allie today. I'm June today. Just writing in their head, and so it adds a little bit more spice, I'd say, to the process.
Thanks. A two-part question. Was there a character whose head it was the easiest to get into, and was there one who was the biggest challenge?
Oh, that's a tough question because I kind of feel like the easiest for me in this particular book was Allie, because I sort of knew she knew all the secrets. Well, she didn't know the relationship between their parents, but she knew that June was her sister. So that part was fun and easy, that she had the secret, that she trying to figure out the best time to reveal that June is her sister, which is not a spoiler because you find out in the very beginning of the book that June is her sister, but June doesn't find out till about quite a ways into the story that they're connected. And so I loved her point of view. You know, each character has something else that I love writing in their points of view about. I loved Beck. He was he was a good guy who had been through some hard things and really needed to be happy and needed, to find somebody in his life. And he really helped June sort of come to terms with the changes that she was dealing with. And I loved that he was a supportive and kind person, that even though he did have his own dark demons that he struggled with, he had kind of come through on the other side almost, and was in a place that he could help somebody else, which is, my books are always about people helping each other deal with what they're going through, because that's, a big part of my life as well, is that I have so many supportive people in my world who help us deal with things that we have to deal with. And so I like writing that kind of character. I love the grandmother. I was never in her point of view. They have a grandmother. I haven't really talked much about her, but she's Allie's grandma, and obviously June's as well, but June doesn't know it till towards the end of the book. But she runs a bookstore, and she's just this funny, warm, kind person too. And I love writing kind of the older people who have the life experience that that I don't yet have. I'm getting there, but yeah, I like writing her as well.
She's extremely aspirational for me. I'm like, I am running a bookstore at the that's the life I would love and embrace so readily. Yeah. Oh. I also really appreciated some of the animals that appear. I have to say, there's an excellent dog and a cat named Chaucer. And as somebody who studied medieval history in college, I was just like, yay, Chaucer.
I was trying to think of I was sort of basing him on Hemingway, the father, Carson Wells. I was basing him on Hemingway a little bit, who had has I don't remember what they call him, not polydactyl. What's the
I think that
multiple
is.
fingers? Anyway, he has cats that had weird, like six fingers instead of five, or whatever the cats usually have. Anyway, and they're famous in Key West. And so I kind of thought, well, what kind of cats would this author have? And so I came up with these cats, and they've named, and Allie and her grandmother named them all after literary figures who had appeared in his books, and so he happened to have a character named Chaucer. So that's what the cat's name was. They were fun to write. And then Hank was the dog that's Beck's dog, and June, I think, kind of opens her heart first to him before she can open her heart to Beck, and so there's a progression there. This big rangy dog who loves her, who loved Carson, and so comes to the cabin every day where June is staying for a treat, and so it's sort of a little by little she starts to open her heart to the dog, and that allows her to maybe open her heart to everybody else in the book.
Yeah. And that's lovely because and that has happened to me, not romantically, but just sort of like you meet a really good animal and you're like, I know that eventually animals over time take on a little bit of the personalities of their owner. So you're probably a good person if this animal is cool. So
Right. If the animal adores you, then, they got to see something in you, even
yeah.
if she's sort of prickly to everybody. And yet to this dog, so from other people's point of view, they can see her softening towards this dog. And that sort of shows that she's not as prickly. She doesn't have such a prickly exterior as she puts onto the world. There's more to her than she's letting people see.
Yeah. Oh, well, I really love this book so much, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your next one, because you have another coming in October, another wintry adventure, it sounds like. Could you tell us about Snowkissed?
Sure. I had so much fun writing this one. So this was another book in my Shelter Spring series. This will be the third one. The first one was Christmas at the Shelter Inn. The second one was last year's The December Market. And then this one is Snowkiss, which is the story of I'm gonna forget all the characters' names now because I put it away and went through all the edits. But it was, let's see, Holly, who is her twin sister Hannah, were best friends with the heroines of the other books. And so Holly is a single mother, divorced single mother, of a girl with Down syndrome who's 5 years old. And so she is she runs a flower shop. She's focused on her daughter. She's focused on her family, all these things that are her priorities. And then suddenly her best friend goes into rehab, or one of her coworkers goes into rehab, and her daughter is staying with Holly, and then her uncle comes to town to take the daughter and care for the daughter while his sister's in rehab. And he's a Navy fighter pilot, and, all these different things that are really sexy. And he falls in love with her daughter first, and then her, and it's a really sweet story. And it's cozy and warm, and it's about family and all the things I love writing at Christmas time. Just people sort of coming to terms with things. Like Holly's big problem in this book is that her ex-husband has not really focused on their daughter at all. He's got a new wife, he's got a new child. That's where his focus has been. And yet he's coming back for Christmas for his sister's wedding that she's doing the flowers for, and he wants to have the daughter stay with him and spend Christmas with him. And so it's sort of some of the themes of how divorced people handle the child's thing at Christmas time and not being with their kids during the holidays and different things like that. So anyway, I had lots of fun writing that one. It's cozy and warm, and you can find it, I think, in October.
Great. That sounds really lovely, and it brings to fore, I think, what you said about your tagline, as it were, on your website. It's about healing, and I think that like there is something, because you are reading about people who themselves are healing, but also just like as a reader, you are healed a little bit too, I think, because you're like these are stories that are populated by people who are like, yes, flawed, but who are essentially good people at heart, and it's really good to be reminded of that every once in a while.
Especially now, the world sometimes feels very dark right now in a lot of ways. And I think we need to be reminded that light comes from helping each other, it's not in the bigger global things, it's in our neighborhoods and helping our neighbors and helping, that's kind of the small ways we can make changes in the world by making everybody else's life a little bit better and a little bit easier and reaching out to those who maybe need support right now in their worlds. And so that's sort of I hope that people find comfort in my books that I love. I've had them called comfort reads, and I'm totally great with that because I think we are all seeking that sometimes as readers, that we really want to come out of it feeling better about the world that maybe doesn't always feel great right now.
And yeah, well, thank you so much for bringing some light again to our podcast and talking about your books with us.
Thank you for having me. I love talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right, listeners, please check out The Lost Book of First Loves. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out in the world, so it will be available, and you can head to your favorite bookstore or website or library, wherever you like to go for your books. Okay, it's time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.